There's a kind of quiet that only exists 100 feet above the ground, in a glass box on top of a mountain, with nothing but forest stretching to every horizon. It's not peaceful, it's heavy. It's the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat, the blood moving through your ears, the tiny creaks and groans of the tower adjusting to the wind. Fire lookouts the men and women who spend months alone in these tiny cabins. Scanning the horizon for smoke, they know this quiet better than anyone. They're trained to spot wildfires, but they're not trained for the other things they see, the things that don't appear in any manual, the figures that walk the same trail every night but leave no tracks when the sun comes up, the voices that crackle through the radio on dead channels, calling their names, the lights in the forest that aren't campfires, aren't headlights, and aren't anything that should be there. Most lookouts quit after their first season. Not because of the isolation, not because of the boredom, but because of what they saw from 100 feet up, with nothing but glass between them and the endless dark. Tonight, we're climbing the stairs to 3 different towers. We're sitting in the chair by the window. And we're listening to 3 true accounts from former lookouts who went up expecting silence and came down with stories they'll carry for the rest of their lives. Turn down the lights, listen to the wind, and whatever you do, don't look too long at the tree line. I'm your narrator. Let's climb. This first story comes from a man named Caleb, a college student who took a summer job as a fire lookout in the Bitterroot National Forest in Montana. He was an outdoorsy kid, comfortable with solitude and the idea of spending 4 months in a tower reading books, watching sunsets, and occasionally reporting a lightning strike sounded like heaven. The tower was called Bald Peak Lookout, a classic 1930s wooden cab perched on a rocky outcrop at about 8,000 feet. The nearest road was a 3-hour hike down a switchback trail. Nearest town was an hour's drive from the trailhead. It was for all practical purposes. On another planet, the first few weeks were idyllic. He fell into a rhythm. Wake up with the sun, scan the horizon with binoculars, log the weather, read, cook simple meals on a propane stove, and watch the Milky Way emerge in the ink-black sky. But around the 3rd week, he started noticing something. Every night around 2 a.m., he would wake up to the sound of the tower creaking not from the wind, but from a rhythmic, steady pressure, as if someone was walking on the catwalk that encircled the cab. Get up, shine his flashlight out the windows, and see nothing. He chalked it up to the tower settling, temperature changes, his imagination. Then he started seeing the figure. It was always at dusk. He'd be doing his final scan of the day and he'd spot a dark silhouette on a specific switchback of the trail about half a mile below the tower. It looked like a person, tall, thin, standing completely still, facing the tower. The first few times, he assumed it was a hiker, but the trail was closed to the public. It was a service trail for Forest Service personnel only, and no one ever came up to the tower. He'd watch the figure for a few minutes, and then it would simply not be there. He'd look away to log something, look back, and the switchback was empty. He started watching more carefully, set up his camera with a telephoto lens pointed at that switchback, and set it to record at dusk. The next morning, he reviewed the footage. There it was, a figure, standing on the switchback. But the footage was strange. The figure was blurry, out of focus, even though the rocks and trees around it were sharp. It was like the camera couldn't quite resolve it. And then, at the exact same moment every night, 8:47 p.m., the figure would take a step, not walk away, just take one step forward, toward the tower. Reviewed footage from previous nights. Same thing. 8:47 p.m. One step. He checked the date stamp on the first night he'd recorded it. Counted the nights. He realized with a cold, sinking dread that the figure had started much farther down the trail. And every night it took one step closer. He calculated the distance. If it continued at this rate, it would reach the base of his tower stairs on the night of August 17th. That was 3 weeks away. Caleb didn't sleep well after that. He radioed the district office, trying to sound casual. "Hey, anyone else ever see weird stuff on the Bald Peak Trail? Hikers, maybe?" The response was a long pause. Then a voice crackled back. "Bald Peak? That trail's been closed for 20 years. Landslide took out the lower section. No one's been up there since '03. Caleb's blood ran cold. Didn't mention the figure again. He just watched. Every night at 8:47 p.m., the figure took its step. It was closer now. You could make out more details through the telephoto lens. It was wearing clothes, old-fashioned clothes, heavy trousers, suspenders, a wide-brimmed hat. It looked like a fire lookout from the 1930s. And its face was turned up toward the tower. But where the face should have been, there was only a dark, hollow void, like a deep hole in the world. The night of August 16th, Caleb didn't sleep at all. He sat in the tower with every light on, a heavy axe handle across his knees, watching the trail. At 8:47 p.m., the figure took its step. It was now at the base of the tower stairs. He could hear it. The soft, heavy tread of boots on the wooden steps. Thump, thump, slowly, deliberately it climbed. He stood up, gripping the axe handle, facing the door. The footsteps stopped just outside. It was a long, terrible silence. Then, a voice. It was faint, like a radio transmission from very far away, full of static and distance. It said, "Is there smoke? Do you see the smoke?" Caleb didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was frozen shut. The voice came again, more insistent. "The fire. It's coming. Do you see it?" And then the door handle rattled. Once, twice, and stopped. The footsteps retreated down the stairs. Caleb waited until sunrise, packed his essential gear, and hiked down the trail. He didn't look at the switchback where the figure had stood. He radioed the district office from the trailhead and quit. He never went back. He later learned that in 1934, a lookout named Arthur Pease had died on Bald Peak. A lightning strike had started a fire that swept up the mountain faster than he could escape. He radioed for help, but no one came in time. They found his body at the base of the tower stairs, his hand reaching for the door. Some say on quiet nights, you can still hear him on the radio, asking if anyone sees the smoke. And some say he still walks the trail every night, climbing the stairs, looking for someone to answer. Our second story comes from a woman named Diana, a retired school teacher who spent her summers as a volunteer fire lookout in the Cascade Range of Washington State. She was in her 60s, tough, practical, and not given to flights of fancy. She'd been doing the lookout gig for 7 years and loved the peace. Her tower was called Sentinel Peak, a modern metal structure with solar panels and a small but comfortable cab. Her only real company was a two-way radio that connected her to the district dispatch, and, occasionally, to other lookouts on nearby peaks. There was one channel on the radio, Channel 7, that was supposed to be dead. It had been an old frequency used decades ago, but the repeater station that serviced it had burned down in the 1980s and was never replaced. It was just static. But one night, around 11 p.m., Diana was reading by lantern light when the radio, she kept on a low volume on the main channel, suddenly crackled to life on Channel 7. She hadn't touched the dial. A voice came through. It was a man's voice, young and strained, full of a desperate, breathless urgency. Sentinel. Sentinel Peak. Do you copy? I'm at. I don't know where I am. The fire. It's circling. I can't see the trail. Please, Sentinel. Do you read? Diana grabbed the radio. Her heart was pounding. She keyed the mic. This is Sentinel Peak, I read you. Who is this? What is your location? Static. Then the voice came back, but it was faint, fading in and out like a station you're driving away from. Sentinel, thank God, I'm at the old ranger station. Well, that's gone. The creek, Dry Creek. The fire jumped the line. I need a bearing. I need a way out, please. Diana knew the area. There was a place called Dry Creek, about 4 miles east of her tower. But there was no old ranger station there. There's no fire. She scanned the horizon with her binoculars. No smoke. No glow. Nothing. She keyed the mic again. I don't see any fire. What's your name? What year is it? There was a long, crackling pause. Then the voice came back, and it was different. It was calmer, resigned, and it said, It's 1953. My name is Harold. I think I'm not going to make it home. Tell Martha I'm sorry. Tell her I love her. And tell her the radio doesn't reach where I'm going. The transmission cut to dead static. Diana sat there in the silence of her tower, her hands shaking. She tried hailing on Channel 7 for an hour. Nothing. The next morning, she radioed the district office and asked about the history of Sentinel Peak. The dispatcher, an old-timer named Gus, told her that back in '53, a young lookout named Harold Vance had been stationed at a tower that used to stand on the next ridge over. There was a big fire that summer, the Dry Creek fire. It shifted in the wind and cut off his escape route. They found his body, a week later, huddled in a rocky outcrop. His radio still clutched in his hand. He'd been calling for help on Channel 7 for 2 days, but the repeater was down, and no one heard him. Diana never touched the Channel 7 dial again. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind was just right, she'd hear a faint crackle from the radio. And a voice so distant it was almost a whisper saying, Sentinel, Sentinel Peak. Do you copy? She never answered. She didn't know if she should. Because some voices on the radio aren't looking for a rescue. They're just looking for someone to hear them. So they don't feel so alone in the dark. Our final story takes us to a tower in the remote Gila National Forest of New Mexico. This account comes from a man named Tomas, a former wildland firefighter who took a lookout job to recover from an injury and spend some quiet time healing. He was a practical man, a problem solver, not easily spooked. His tower, Mogollon Peak, was one of the most isolated in the region. The views were breathtaking, but the nights were absolute. No light pollution for 100 miles, it's just the stars and the deep velvet black of the high desert forest. One of his duties was to watch for holdover lightning strike trees that get hit by lightning and smolder for days before bursting into flame. He had a powerful spotlight and a set of high-powered binoculars for night scanning. About a month into his season, he noticed something odd. Every night around 1 a.m., a single light would appear deep in a canyon about 3 miles to the southwest. It wasn't a campfire, too steady, too white. It wasn't a headlight, no roads out there. It was just a single, bright, stationary point of light, like a lantern hanging in the darkness. The first few times he figured it was a backpacker with a powerful LED lantern. But the light never moved. It never flickered. It just appeared at 1 a.m. and vanished at 4 a.m. night after night. Tomas got curious. He trained his spotlight on the location and flashed it 3 times. A universal signal for hello, or are you okay? The light in the canyon went dark. He waited. Nothing. He shrugged and went back to his routine. The next night at exactly 1 a.m., the light appeared again. But this time it wasn't stationary. It was moving, slowly, deliberately. It was coming up the canyon wall, toward the tower. Tomas grabbed his binoculars. The light was bobbing, like someone was carrying it and walking over rough terrain. But there was something wrong with the way it moved. It was too smooth, too steady. It didn't sway like a lantern in a human hand. It glided. He flashed his spotlight at it again, 3 times. The moving light stopped. And then it flashed back, 3 times. Tomas felt a chill run down his spine. He flashed once. The light flashed once. He flashed twice. The light flashed twice. It was mimicking him. He grabbed the radio to call dispatch, but the signal was dead, something that had never happened before. He looked back through the binoculars. The light was closer now. He could see it more clearly. It wasn't a lantern. It wasn't a flashlight. It was a single, glowing orb of pale, cold light hovering about 6 feet off the ground. And beneath it, just barely visible in the glow, was a shape. A tall, thin, dark shape that seemed to absorb the light around it. It had no discernible features, just a void in the rough outline of a person that was looking up at the tower. At him, Tomas backed away from the window. He grabbed his handheld spotlight and killed all the lights in the cab. He sat in the dark, his heart hammering, listening. The tower creaked, the wind whispered, and then he heard it, a soft tap, tap, tap on the glass of the window. He didn't move. The tapping came again, more insistent, and then a voice. It wasn't a voice from outside, it was inside the cab. A low, humming, resonant voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It said, "You called. We answered. Let us in." Tomas didn't sleep. He sat in the dark with his back against the door, clutching a fire axe, until the first gray light of dawn began to seep over the eastern ridge. The tapping stopped. The voice faded. When the sun was fully up, he looked out the window. It was on the glass. Written in a fine, pale dust that looked like ash were 3 words. "We see you." He radioed in a false report of a medical emergency and was evacuated by helicopter that afternoon. He never went back to that tower. He never went back to firefighting. Lives in a city now, surrounded by concrete and streetlights, where the night is never truly dark. He told me that sometimes, when he's walking home late at night and he passes a dark alley, he'll see a flicker of pale light in the corner of his eye. And he'll hear a faint tapping on a window that isn't there. He'll walk a little faster, because he knows now some lights in the forest aren't fires. And when you signal them, they don't just signal back. They start walking toward you. And they don't stop until they reach your door. 3 towers, 3 lookouts. 3 encounters with the unexplainable that linger long after the fire season ends. Caleb on Bald Peak, who watched a figure climb his stairs every night for 3 weeks. Diana on Sentinel Peak, who heard a voice from 1953 calling for a rescue that would never come. And Tomas on Mogollon Peak, who flashed a light into the darkness and received an answer that walked toward him. The wilderness is vast and ancient. We build our tiny towers, our little boxes of light and safety, and we think we're the only ones watching. But these stories remind us that the forest has its own watchers, its own lights, its own voices. And sometimes, when you're 100 feet up with nothing but glass between you and the dark, you realize that you're not the observer. You're the one being observed. If these stories gave you a reason to keep the lights on tonight, do me a favor, hit that like button. Subscribe if you're new, and ring the bell. We climb into the dark corners of the world every week. Now tell me in the comments, could you spend a summer alone in a fire tower after hearing these stories? And have you ever seen something in the wilderness that you still can't explain? I read every single one. The comments section on this channel is a map of the strange and the terrifying. Until next time, keep your light bright, keep your door locked, and whatever you see in the trees at night, don't signal back. Not unless you're ready for what might answer.